History tells us that the princes of Madoc only occupied the castle up there on Dinas Bran for a very short time. But legend and poetry tell us a little more. They say that in maybe the 12th century or so, there was a lord who lived in the half-ruined castle. He had one daughter, Myfanwy. She was the apple of his eye, and he had great plans for her, that she should marry well to another noble family, to increase the power and influence that he had over the land. But Myfanwy, like so many young women, had ideas of her own. It was not riches that tempted her, but poetry and romance. And she had lost her heart to a young poet of the town, Hywel. Only one of Hywel's poems to his dear beloved Myfanwy still remains. But from that fragment, we can see that he really had a bard's way with words. And this is what won Myfanwy's heart. Of course, she could say nothing to her father of a poor poet whom she loved and longed for. That would not have sat well with her father's great and vaunting ambition. But nonetheless, she and Hywel managed to pursue their romance in secret. Every day he would scribble away, penning verses to her beauty, to her raven brow, to her rosy cheek, to her sweet lips. And every day he would climb Dinas Bran part way to where a certain oak tree grew, and into the cleft in its trunk he would tuck his daily verse. And every evening Myfanwy was allowed, under the strict supervision of her ladies-in-waiting, of course, to take the air on the hill slopes, and somehow she always managed to evade them just enough to brush her hand against the trunk of that tree, slip the note into her sleeve, so that when at last she was alone, she could read Hywel's poems, which inflamed her love for him even more. So far gone in love was she, that she became reckless and foolish. When her father was away for a day or two and a night or two, travelling round his domain, following up his business, well, Myfanwy found a way to leave a note to Hywel in the crook of the tree, and in the darkest part of the night he climbed further than he'd ever climbed before, up to the brow of the hill, up to the castle itself, and down from Myfanwy's window a rope snaked, and he climbed up, and they were together. Before dawn he let himself down the rope and slipped away, believing that he had gone unobserved. But Myfanwy's father paid her ladies-in-waiting well to keep hawk's eye upon her, and one or another of them had seen the figure leaving, and when the Lord returned they told him what they had seen. He grew cold and bitter with rage, but he believed that anger is a dish best served cold, so instead of confronting his daughter, he set a trap. A day or two later he said to her one morning, "I shall be away until tomorrow, my dear. I hope all will be well. I hope you won't be lonely." Her eyes sparkled at this news. She cast her lids down demurely, but too late. He saw that guilty sign. Maybe someone less suspicious would have missed that telltale spark, but he knew. And although he gave out that he was leaving the castle, he only rode down to the bottom of the hill, left his horse there, and crept like a thief back into his own castle and hid in the ivy opposite the tower where Myfanwy's window was lit by a single candle. He waited cold and stiff in the night air, but his patience was rewarded. Hywel came creeping up. He gave the soft call of an owl. At that signal, the rope came snaking down from the window. Hywel took hold of it and began to climb, but he'd hardly gone more than a man's height up the wall when Myfanwy's father leapt from his hiding place and beat Hywel across the ribs with the flat of the blade of his sword. Winded and gasping for breath, Hywel fell to the ground, and Myfanwy, looking out, saw with horror her father standing over her beloved. He looked up at her with eyes like iron. "Let down the rope," he said. She stared at him. "Let down the rope!" With trembling fingers that could hardly undo the knot, at last she loosened it. The rope snaked down, and her father dragged Hywel to his feet, ignoring his groans of pain from the bruised and broken ribs. "You wanted to see him," he called up to Myfanwy. "Well, you shall. I will bind him here." And taking the rope, he wound it around and around Hywel against the great thick stem of ivy. "And you shall sit at your window and watch as he fades and dies." And as Myfanwy stared down with horrified eyes at her lover groaning in his bonds, her father drew from his waist a long, sharp dagger, a stiletto, and plunged it into Hywel's belly. He slumped against the ropes. The blood leaking out already began to stain his bonds. It was a death blow, but a slow blow. And Myfanwy's father, now he raced up the steps to the top of the tower, calling to her women to come to him, which, as if they had been waiting, they immediately appeared. He said, "Drag her to the window, sit her there and keep her there. Let her not turn her eyes away, let her not close her eyes. She shall watch him." The two women swept in, took Myfanwy one by each arm, dragged her to the window, slammed a stool under her, pressed her against the bars across the window, and held her still. She was forced to sit there and watch as Hywel's lifeblood slowly ebbed away. But her father's cruelty did not end there. He left the body to be pecked by the crows that make their home on Dinas Bran, until only the white bones hung there. Hywel's suffering was short in comparison with Myfanwy's. She was driven mad by this sight, and soon she died. But those who carried on living and working in the castle soon became aware that some ghost was haunting the ruins. Hen Skerbud, they called him, the old skeleton. And though Hywel's poems can still be read, and though Myfanwy's sadness can still be remembered in the song that's named for her, Bahamod Dichter o Myfanwy, song beloved of choirs everywhere, the story of Myfanwy and Hywel, its great tragedy, will always be remembered.